You know that feeling you get when you taste honey, like just that pure sweetness.
Hmm.
It's not just a treat. It's like this ancient connection to people who've been enjoying this for millennia.
Yeah, thousands of years, right?
Today, we're going deep into the history of beekeeping.
Really, going back.
Yeah, we're going to see how people went from just taking honey from wild nests to managing them.
It's amazing when you think about it how people figured that out. They had to realize that to keep getting honey, they needed to keep the bees alive.
Right, like if you just destroy a whole hive to get the honey, you're out of luck next time.
Exactly. So they had to think long term.
So, what were some of the early ways people tracked bees and found their hives?
Well, one way was with bee traps. They'd make these things out of reeds horns, sometimes even logs, and they'd capture a few bees, then carefully release them one at a
Oh,
time.
so they'd follow them back to the hive. Clever.
Yeah, and the Romans, they even used colored dyes to mark bees.
Oh, wow. So they could see where they were going. I
Mm,
mean, that takes a lot of patience.
yeah. It really does. It shows how dedicated they were to understanding these creatures.
But they weren't the only ones who figured out how to track bees, right? There's that bird.
Oh, you mean the honey guide bird?
Yeah.
It actually leads people to bee nests. It's unbelievable.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
The bird gets some honeycomb and the people get honey. It's a perfect example of how we're all connected.
That's amazing. So once people found the nests, they started coming up with ways to keep them, right? Like those early beehives.
Yeah, they used whatever they could find, hollow logs, straw mats.
I've even heard of some made from pottery.
That's right. They got pretty creative. And in Asia, they had these things called rafters, basically boards attached to trees for giant honeybees to build their combs on.
Wow, so different from the hives we're used to seeing. So what about in Europe? What did they use?
Well, in Western Europe, the skep was pretty common.
The skep? What's that?
It's like a dome-shaped basket hive,
Hmm.
made from straw, usually.
Sounds kind of charming.
Yeah, but they had a big downside. To get the honey, you usually had to destroy the whole hive. Oh no, that doesn't sound very sustainable.
No, it wasn't. And that's actually what led to the search for a removable comb hive.
So one where you could get the honey without harming the bees.
Exactly. They spent centuries trying to figure that out.
What were some of the early attempts like?
Well, there were some hives with vertical slats so you could try to remove individual combs, but it was tricky.
I bet.
Yeah, it was easy to disturb the bees and mess up the hive.
Then there's that story of Francois Huber, the blind scientist who designed a hive shaped like a book.
Oh, yeah. His leaf hive was incredible. Each frame was like a page you could open. It allowed him to really study the bees without hurting them.
That's amazing. Talk about dedication.
Right.
So it seems like all this observation and experimentation led to a more scientific approach to beekeeping.
You're right. In the 17th century, there was a real shift towards understanding the bees better and using that knowledge to improve beekeeping.
So those observation hives where you could see inside, they were a big part of that.
Definitely. People could finally see what was going on in there. It must have been fascinating.
I can imagine. Some big names like John Evelyn and Samuel Pepys were really into beekeeping.
Yeah, they were. They even wrote about how much they enjoyed watching the bees through glass.
It sounds like they paved the way for even more discoveries.
Absolutely. And speaking of discoveries, we're about to meet the man who changed beekeeping forever, Lorenzo Langstroth. Lorenzo Langstroth. He was a real pioneer in beekeeping.
Yeah, his invention, the Langstroth hive, it's still the most common type of hive used today.
And for good reason, too. You see, Langstroth, he was a really observant guy. And he noticed something interesting about the way bees build their combs.
Oh, what's that?
He realized they always leave a specific space between them. Just a small gap, but really important.
So he called it bee space.
Yeah.
And he designed his hive around that idea.
Exactly. The Langstroth hive has these movable frames that fit perfectly within that bee space, so you can take them out and put them back without disturbing the bees too much.
So before that, you had to basically destroy the hive to get the honey.
Pretty much. But with the Langstroth hive, you could just remove a frame, extract the honey, and put the frame back.
That's amazing. It must have revolutionized beekeeping.
It absolutely did. It made beekeeping so much easier and more efficient, and it spread like wildfire. I mean, beekeepers everywhere started using his hive.
It's like going from the Stone Age to the modern age of beekeeping.
Exactly. And it led to a huge increase in honey production.
But I guess like any big change, there were some downsides too, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. The Langstroth hive also contributed to the spread of European honeybees all over the world.
And that wasn't always a good thing.
Nope. Sometimes those bees outcompeted native bee species or disrupted the local ecosystem.
It's like introducing a new plant to a garden. It might look pretty, but it could end up taking over.
A good example of that is the story of Africanized honeybees. sometimes called killer bees.
Oh, yeah, those bees are pretty scary. I remember hearing about them.
It actually started with an experiment in Brazil in the 1950s.
What were they trying to do?
Well, they wanted to create a bee that was better suited to tropical climates, so they crossed European honeybees with African bees.
I see African bees are known for being really tough and good honey producers.
Right, but they're also known for being very aggressive.
So I guess they were hoping to get the best of both worlds.
Exactly, but things didn't quite go as planned. Some of those hybrid bees escaped and, well, they spread quickly.
And they took their aggressive genes with them.
Yeah, Africanized bees are very defensive, and their stings can be really dangerous.
It's a good reminder that we have to be careful when we mess with nature.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even with good intentions, we can sometimes cause unintended consequences.
So the Langstroth hive, it led to this huge increase in honey production. But it also had some unintended consequences.
Right, and it also played a role in the rise of industrialized beekeeping.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, these massive beekeeping operations with thousands of hives that are transported all over the place to pollinate crops.
I see. So it's not just about backyard beekeepers anymore.
Nope. It's big business. And while it's made food production more efficient, it's also put a lot of stress on bees.
In what way?
Well, think about it. They're being moved constantly exposed to pesticides, and they don't always have access to a variety of food sources.
So it's not exactly a natural way for them to live.
No, it's not. And it's made them more vulnerable to diseases and other problems.
So it's a bit of a trade-off. We get more food, but the bees might suffer?
Yeah, it's a complex issue, and
Yeah.
it's something that a lot of people are trying to address.
Like, are there any beekeepers who are trying to find a more sustainable way to do things?
Oh, definitely. There's a growing movement towards more sustainable beekeeping practices.
What does that look like?
Well, it involves things like reducing pesticide use, providing bees with more diverse food sources, and trying to minimize stress during transportation.
So it's about finding a better balance between our needs and the needs of the bees.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we need to take care of these creatures if we want them to continue to thrive.
It's encouraging to hear that there are people working on solutions.
Absolutely. It gives me hope for the future of bees. And speaking of the future, we've talked a lot about the practical aspects of beekeeping, but there's another dimension to this story, too.
So we've talked about, the history of beekeeping, how hives have changed and the challenges bees face today. But there's something more to this story, right? It's not just about honey.
Yeah, it's about our relationship with these amazing creatures. When you really start to understand bees, it's hard not to be in awe of them.
They're so tiny, but they create these complex societies. They work together, they communicate, they care for their young.
It's incredible. They're like a miniature version of, of a lot of things we see in the human world.
Right, like their hives are these little microcosms of nature.
Exactly. And just like in nature, there's a delicate balance. There's a balance that we've sometimes disrupted with our human interventions.
Like with the Africanized honeybees.
Yeah, that was a case where we tried to control things and, well, it backfired.
It's a reminder that we need to approach nature with more respect and humility.
Definitely. We can't just assume we can manipulate things without consequences.
So what have we learned from all this? From this long history of beekeeping? What lessons can we take away?
Well, I think one of the biggest lessons is that we need to shift our mindset. We need to move away from exploitation and towards stewardship.
Stewardship, that's a good word. So it's not just about taking what we need from bees, it's about taking care of them.
Right. It's about recognizing that we're all connected. Our well-being is tied to the health of the planet and all its creatures, including bees.
So beekeeping at its core, it's about fostering a healthy relationship with these amazing creatures.
Exactly. It's about understanding their needs, respecting their limits, and making sure they can thrive.
And when we do that, we're not just getting honey. We're helping to ensure a healthy ecosystem, a diverse food system, and a sustainable future for our planet.
So next time you see a honeybee buzzing around, don't just see a bug. See it as a symbol of resilience, of collaboration, of our connection to the natural world.
What a journey this has been. From those first honey hunts to the complexities of modern beekeeping. We've covered a lot of ground. But one thing's for sure, our relationship with bees is as fascinating and important as ever.
Absolutely. And there's always more to learn.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those bee-friendly flowers blooming. Until next time.